Today's webinar on safety leadership, manager and supervisor responsibility and accountability, presented by Heffernan Consulting. We're so happy you can join us. My name is Ryan Bartnett, and I'll be your moderator today, and I'll be monitoring any questions you might have during the session. Before we open up the session, I'm going to review a couple of key items. All of the webinar materials we discussed today can be found at the website shown, which is aspenrmg.com/heffernanwebinars.htm. If you have trouble with your internet connection during the webinar, we recommend leaving the presentation and logging back in. If you have audio difficulties or a telephone line goes dead during the call, hang up and call back again to the same number. If all lines go dead, watch the on-screen chat box for an alternative call-in number. Feel free to ask questions and provide feedback via the chat box during today's webinar. If you're using a tablet, you tap on the screen for the options bar to appear, and then you can select the appropriate option. We may not respond immediately, but we'll work your questions or feedback into the presentation. If we can't get to your comment or question during the session, we'll be online afterwards to respond. And you may also email us at moderator@aspenrmg.com for up to 48 hours after the webinar. And that website and email will be in a thank you email at the end of this presentation. This is a 1-hour presentation. Questions and comments are very much encouraged throughout. And lastly, we have a number of webinars throughout the year covering a variety of topics, including those listed at the website shown. In addition, we offer the mandatory Preventing Sexual Harassment training in both English and Spanish 3 times a year. And with that, let's begin today's webinar on safety leadership, manager and supervisor responsibility and accountability. Just give me one moment while I change our screen to Kathy Marks, who will be our presenter today. Kathy Marks of Aspen Risk Management Group is a health and safety insurance and risk management consultant. She is a principal and president of risk management of Aspen Risk Management Group, and also the principal and vice president of marketing for ErgoHealthy, a consulting firm that conducts office ergonomics assessments and solves ergonomic problems via online and telephone through its team of ErgoHealthy coaches. Kathy has also served in risk and safety management positions for mid-sized companies, and she spent time on both the carrier and insurance agency broker side of the business. Kathy has extensive training experience in program content development and implementation, providing training programs to senior management, broker communities, insurance companies, risk managers, and employees. She has conducted trainings on numerous subjects, including OSHA 10-hour courses, and is one of 10 instructors nationwide authorized to teach the Certified Occupational Safety Specialist course. Hello, Kathy. How's it going?
Thank you, Ryan. Great. Thank you so much for that. And you can see my screen just fine?
Yeah, we got you very clear.
Excellent. Well, welcome everyone. It is an honor for me to speak with you this morning, and thank you for taking some time out of your busy day. And as Ryan said, I have experience not only on the consulting side, but I was in your shoes as a worldwide safety manager for a technology company in San Jose, and I know what it's like to manage safety on a day-to-day basis as well as the consulting side. So my goal today is to give you some tools, give you some support, and maybe make you feel a little bit more comfortable in your role as a manager, supervisor, leader, mentor, coach in the safety world when it comes to your organization. So let's walk through this journey. I told Ryan that if you have questions, please feel free to ask them, and he is welcome to interrupt me. I'd rather answer the questions throughout the presentation than wait until the end. I think that's a little bit more effective. I promise to take a breath and pause so that he can do so. And And so let's go ahead and begin. One of the things, of course, is we do have our disclaimer that this is not legal advice. This is world experience advice, best practices advice, and certainly through my 30 years of being in the safety environment, ideas that I've picked up as well, and certainly best practices, and those certainly provided by OSHA. Some of the things I would like to cover with you today, and the main thing that this presentation, and you have access to this presentation as well, is that every decision you make as a safety leader, and it doesn't matter if you have the title safety manager, safety coordinator, anytime you are in a supervisory position, anytime that you have one person report to you, understand that their life is in your hand. You are their supervisor. Whether you're a foreman, a supervisor, a manager, anytime someone reports to you, every decision you make is going to fall into one of these buckets. It's a moral decision you make because of their life, a legal or financial, a legal decision because you have OSHA requirements that you have to find or fall under, and certainly a financial bucket. The decisions you make certainly can affect the company bottom line. I also want to talk a little bit of difference between managing and leading. I think recently there's this, oh my gosh, you're a manager, you should be a leader. Well, you know what? You do both. You have to manage. There are processes and tactical things that are under your purview that you have to do. But certainly you can do it in a way of leading. So I want to talk a little bit about how that relates to safety leadership. And at the end of the day, I want you to understand, we'll talk about your role as safety coach, safety mentor, manager, protector. You're an advocate. You play a huge role in the life and the quality of life to everyone who reports to you. And so I hope that you will have maybe a heightened level of self-respect, if you will, as a leader within your organization. So bottom line is, think of these three buckets. At the end of the day, what is your role as a leader within the organization? Your job is to save lives. Your job is to prevent injuries and illnesses. And your job is to keep your company from financial harm. That's it. As soon as you become a manager or supervisor, one person whose life depends on the decisions that you make, every decision you make from that day forward is going to fall into that moral, legal, or financial bucket. So Ryan, I do have a polling question.
Yes, we do. Thank you very much, Kathy. I'm going to go ahead and launch the question. So let us know what you think. How long has OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, been in place? Has it been around for 100 years, only 50 years, 35 years, or 46 years? Please select the answer which you think it is. Okay, and it looks like most everyone has submitted their response. I'm going to close the polling in just a moment now and share our answers. Okay, we have 7% of us thinking it's been around for 100 years, and 40% saying 50 years, 23% of us are saying 35 years it's been around, and 30% of us are saying 46 years.
Wow, that's great, Ryan. Thank you so much. And you know what's very interesting is that the OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health Administration, both Fed and Cal-OSHA, started in 1970, only 46 years ago. And what that really tells us is that our parents, our grandparents, when we think about it, unless they worked in a mine, the average employee had no worker protection laws until 1970. And so we're still kind of learning our way. Certainly when in 1970 when Fed OSHA and Cal OSHA, for those of you in California, we have our own set of OSHA regulations that have to be as stringent or more stringent than Fed OSHA, started at the same time. We kind of learned our way through and additional regulations have been added. So as a supervisor, especially if you are not the safety manager, you're thinking, oh my gosh, how am I going to know all this? I have to know how to run my company, how to make our product, how to manage our field. I also have to know OSHA regulations. The good news is that there's a lot of support, certainly through Heffernan Insurance Brokers and all of that. There's a lot of areas that you can get support. The main thing is it is still relatively new in only 46 years. So what I love is this quote. The Secretary of Labor in 1968, 2 years before OSHA started, said, look, people can't see the blood on the food that they eat, on the things that they buy, and on the services they get. And for those of you that work with companies, whether it's heavy equipment, making widgets, food processing, the average consumer has no idea what it's like to get that product into their home, into their car, whatever it is, but you know what it's like. And so that's why we started OSHA. For those of you, just a little bit of trivia is that for those of you that read The Jungle, it was published in 1906, and Upton Sinclair had been writing about worker rights, and he wrote this book called The Jungle, and he actually worked in the slaughterhouses of Chicago, and he described in detail the killing floors and how men were losing hands and arms and sliding into the pits of guts and blood, and when this book came out, the outcry was not worker safety, but the outcry was, what? You mean there could be a thumb in my sausage? It wasn't that, oh my gosh, someone lost a thumb to make me a sausage. It was like, ooh. And so from 1906 until 1970, right? So we had 60 more years before we really said, look, we have got to protect our employees. And so it's a very interesting book, very interesting read. And even in 1970, since then, we've added new rules and regulations. We've added the heat illness standard because people were dying out in our agricultural fields. We've added fall protection standards. So and laser standards, as technology and things have changed, we've changed that as well. So I love this form I'm going to just share with you, and this is kind of a journey, and one of the reasons I like to share this is that as a manager and supervisor, we can't talk about accountability and being creative when it comes to safety if we have employees that are kind of stuck mentally in the 70s. So very quickly, when you think of our journey as in safety, in the 1970s when OSHA started, we were very regulatory specific. We had rules we had to learn. We were very reactive, and our goal was zero noncompliance. We wanted to avoid fines and penalties and OSHA coming on site, so we had equipment and processes we were looking at. Our tools were the new rules and regulations, and whew, another year without a citation or fine. So we spent those 10 years learning about OSHA. In the 1980s, if anybody was around like I was, then we started looking at total quality management, employee surveys, our TQ principles. Now when it came to safety, we were looking at preventing injuries versus reacting to these rules and regulations. Oh, this is where our goal came with zero injuries. You know, the signs that say so many days without an injury. Well, I'll tell you, my feeling is when I see so many days without an injury, I think to myself, those are so many days without a reported injury. Because most companies, and if you're one of those companies, maybe you can kind of make a change after this presentation, especially when I see signs that say, hey, you know, we've had no injuries in the last 30 days. If we can go another 30 days, we'll have a big party. Well, you know what? What are we incentivizing? We're incentivizing no reporting, and that can be an HR nightmare. So I'm going to give you some ideas about celebrating something different than zero injuries. So our motivation again in the 80s was avoiding the cost. We're looking at now the cost of injuries. We're looking at the environment, programs and systems. Do we have things in writing? Our tools, hey, training, investigations, what have we learned? And now our measurement was, okay, injury rates, audit findings, our total recordable incident rates. Bureau of Labor Statistics was starting to collect workplace data. And then in the 90s, we said, look, you know what? We have 20 years of data that we have now been collecting, and we determined that in those first 20 years that most injuries, 80 to 85% of injuries, are caused by unsafe behaviors. Employees are behaving unsafely. So now in the last 10 years or so, we were looking at behavior psychology. We were being more proactive and saying, look, if injuries are primarily caused by unsafe behaviors, what if we celebrated safe behaviors instead of celebrating zero injuries? So here's a challenge that I'd like to give you. What if your company decided to say, look, if we catch so many employees being safe, let's say we set up a criteria, these are safe behaviors we want to see, because we know safe behaviors will reduce injuries. If we catch 20 employees, 30 employees, 50 employees being safe in the first quarter, in the first year, then we'll have a celebration. If we catch employees helping each other with no other reason other than they're being a good citizen to each other, maybe somebody's using a tool, they're going out of their way, they're coming up with a new process or procedure, or they're identifying hazards and letting us know, we count those and we celebrate the behaviors instead of the zero injuries. And what that does is it grows safe people. Now our emphasis is behaviors, our words, our actions. Now our tools are observations and reinforcing those positives versus the negatives. And our measurements are, instead of zero injuries, our measurements are, hey, we had 30% more participation in our training and education. We had 20% more participation in helping to identify injuries. We had more participation in our safety committee. So you can kind of see the change in that positive behavior. Now what are we looking at? Accountability, psychology, being creative. Now safety is expressed through values, right? So I'm going to talk about that a little bit more, that safety is a value, not a priority. Because as you all know, priorities change, right? So maybe those of you are thinking, gosh, should this be a priority for me listening to this? Should I be doing something else? But values don't change. And remember, people's lives depend on the decisions that you make. So it's values, growing safe communities, our leadership and actively caring. That's kind of that journey of safety. Now, if you are talking, you know, humanistic psychology, and you have someone stuck in the 70s saying, hey, just tell me why I have to do it. Just show me in the regulation that I have to do it this way. You're going to have to flex your communication style and get those people kind of stuck in the 70s doing it for regulatory reasons and not because it's the right thing to do. So we have to understand where our team is going through. Maybe you're one of those managers or supervisors that says, hey, look, unless it says I have to in a regulation, I'm not going to do it. Really understand that we have that moral and legal obligation. So what is our role as a manager and supervisor? It's these 5 things. We have to assess hazards in the workplace and implement controls. What can hurt our employees and put in the controls. We have to communicate, educate, and protect our employees. We have to tell them what can hurt them. Now, remember, OSHA started in 1970. It wasn't until the mid-80s that we even had the hazard communication standard. Before the 80s, there was no regulation that said we had to tell our employees about the chemicals they used. So we have to educate them. If somebody gets hurt, we have to manage that injury case fairly and with sincere effort. I'm going to share with you, I've been doing this for close to 30 years. I truly believe 96, 97% of employees that get hurt want to get better, come back to work, and put food on the table for their families. Unfortunately, there are those professional injured that go from company to company, but really get those people back to work, talk to them with respect, and make sure that we get them back to work as quickly as possible. That's it. That's our job as a manager supervisor. What can hurt our employees? Teach them how to protect themselves. If they get hurt, talk to them with respect and get them back to work as soon as possible, because that's our duty. So what I've done is, because I know that there are participants both in California and outside of California, so federal OSHA has something called the General Duty Clause. And when the Occupational Safety and Health Act was passed, the General Duty Clause really says two things. One is that the employer shall furnish to each of his employees a place of employment which are free from recognized hazards. Now here's the scary part, managers and supervisors, that are causing or are likely to cause death or serious injury. So this tells you that you have to know the process. You have to know the best practices of your industry. You have to know not what could cause injury, but what may cause injury to your employees. You have to comply with occupational rules. But look what it also says. The General Duty Clause says, hey, employees, you have to comply with these rules and regulations. So what does this mean for you, supervisors? This means that you can hold employees accountable for your safety and health rules, that your disciplinary action policy should include termination if employees violate safety rules, especially if they violate them where they could cause death or serious injury to another employee. So it's not just on you, it's a team effort. It's behaviors on all levels. So that's the General Duty Clause. And so one thing to keep in mind, this is not an OSHA class, but just one thing to keep in mind. If OSHA comes on site and there is not a rule or regulation that pertains to that particular hazard, OSHA will cite you under the General Duty Clause that says, look, hey, you have to protect your employees from a hazard. Doesn't matter if there's no specific regulation for this hazard, we're going to cite you under the General Duty Clause. California does not have the General Duty Clause because California has their own OSHA regulations. But for those of you that are familiar with Title 8 3203, that's the regulation under the California Code of Regulations, Title 8, under the Injury and Illness Prevention Program, you are required to provide a safe and healthy workplace, and Cal OSHA will cite you under the IIPP or 3203 if there is no regulation that is specific to the hazard that they see. So that's kind of that foundation before we move forward. And Ryan, I'm going to look at my little note that says pause for questions. Do we have any questions to this point?
Not from our audience as of yet. Thank you for pausing.
You are welcome. All right. So we have one more polling question.
And here it goes. Do your supervisors know of their personal responsibility to ensuring a safe and healthy workplace? This is a simple yes or no. I'm sure if they're watching, they do know now. So this seems like a fairly straightforward question.
Yeah.
I'm going to close the polling and share our responses. And a 87% yes, and a small 13% no.
All right. Well, thank you for that, and excellent. So I'm glad that many of you do know that you do have a personal responsibility when it comes to safety and health. And for those 13% or so that didn't know, I want to share just a little bit with you. And so this is something that was an eye-opener when it comes to safety accountability in the workplace. And so you can certainly look this up, and this happened in California, but every state has pretty much something that's very similar. So if you are out of the state of California, please know that your individual state does have something that is similar to what California calls the Corporate Criminal Liability Act. So if you're not familiar, in 2012 at Bumble Bee Tuna in California, there was an employee death. And the picture that I'm showing right now is what's a pressure cooker, as not as the specific pressure cooker where the employee died, but it is a one that is similar to what occurred. In this particular situation, that there was an employee inside this pressure cooker about 35 feet long, fixing a track that the carts filled with canned tuna is pushed into this pressure cooker on this track, and the door is closed, the turnstile is completed, and it's a pressure cooker. And so over a couple hours, everything is pasteurized. Well, what happened in 2012 is there was an employee inside one of these pressure cookers fixing the track, did not hear the people pushing the carts in, or he heard them, but they didn't hear him scream. They put the carts in, closed the door, turned it on, and he cooked to death, very slow, painful death, and it was terrible, of course. What I want to talk about is a couple things. Now, if we were in person, I would be asking you, even if you've never worked in a tuna plant, even if you've never worked around a pressure cooker, most of you that have some sort of a production facility will say, oh my gosh, this could have been prevented by a simple regulation being implemented. And if you thought to yourself, lockout, tagout, you are correct. For those of you not familiar with lockout, tagout, it's a regulation where that employee would have had his own personal lock with his own personal key. He would have turned off the pressure cooker, gone to the circuit, turned off the circuit, put a lock in that circuit, locked it with his key, put his key in his pocket. He could work in that pressure cooker all day without a fear of anyone turning it on when he was inside. And he didn't do that. There's also a confined space regulation that was violated because these are confined spaces. He was inside and there was no monitoring of air or anything like that. So what I wanted to do was I want to just kind of update you as to what happened. So in 2015, Bumble Bee Tuna, and let me just go back to that one page, had to pay $6 million, $6 million in the settlement. And I want to break that down a little bit for you because this is kind of something that managers and supervisors need to understand, and there is some personal liability here that happened with the plant manager and the safety manager. How many of your companies, may I just kind of have that question to yourself, can sustain a $6 million payout? Now, some of this, of course, was insurable and some of it was not. So let me just kind of break this down. They were required to pay $6 million for willfully violating worker safety rules causing this employee death. It is the largest known payout in a California criminal prosecution of workplace safety violations involving a single victim. It was prosecuted by the Consumer Protection Division of the District Attorney's Office in California. So here's how it broke out. Bumblebee has to pay $3 million to replace all of their outdated tuna ovens with new ovens that are automated and will never require workers to set foot inside the superheated pressure system cookers. One of the things that happened was that apparently it was known that these were not maintained. These were older pieces of equipment. This particular track was always breaking down, and that employees just knew that, you know, that it was under repair. So $3 million had to go to fixing, updating their equipment. $1.5 million went to the victim's family. Yes, it exceeded the maximum payout under workers' compensation, but because of the willful violation, it was $1.5 million of restitution. They also have to pay $750,000 under the Environmental Enforcement Fund for future prosecutions of occupational safety and health criminal cases. They also have to pay $750,000 in fines and penalties. They also have to install video cameras at their ovens to ensure safety compliance. They have to provide training to managers and workers about safety rules and conducting safety audits. Now, here is what I find very interesting. If at that time, now this is from, you know, the OSHA, if at that time Bumblebee has complied with all of the aforementioned terms, the company would be allowed to plead guilty to willful failure to implement and maintain an effective safety program, which is a misdemeanor. Right now it's a felony. The plea additionally requires the company to make a public statement conceding guilt. Can we say loss of goodwill? Bumble Bee's director of plant operations, also charged in this case, has agreed to do 320 hours of community service, pay $11,000 in fines and penalties, and take classes on lockout, tagout, and confined spaces. Now, this $11,000 is personal. This is under the Corporate Criminal Liability Act. This is not under the protective veil of the company. Because he was the director of plant operations, he was personally fined $11,000, has to do 320 hours of community service. If he complies, he will be allowed to plead guilty to a misdemeanor at sentencing, because right now it's a felony. The co-defendant, the former safety manager, also pleaded guilty to a felony count of willfully violating lockout tagout rules and proximately causing the victim's death. He has to pay $19,000 in fines and penalties, and in 18 months, if he does all this, he may be allowed to plead guilty to a misdemeanor. Both men are required to make public statements conceding guilt for their respective roles in the victim's death. So what I'm trying to say here is there's personal liability that happened with this death. There's loss of goodwill for the company. There is limited protection when you willfully violate a regulation under OSHA. So both these men were prosecuted under the Corporate Criminal Liability Act, and it's based on the reasonable person standard. Now, there's a lot of legal definitions of reasonable person, but basically they only need to show that a reasonable person would have known or should have known that a serious hazard exists. You have a pressure cooker that looks like that. You know employees are inside fixing it, especially because they're not maintained. You have no implemented lockout tagout program, and that is why they got felony convictions for not implementing lockout tagout. The other part of it is willfully concealing a known danger, sending an employee into a known serious environment, knowing that it's dangerous without telling them that it is so. So it's really important that we understand this is a great example of an extreme case of lack of management control. And the reason that I'm bringing this next slide up is that safety in the workplace has to be managed the way any other critical business function is managed. In addition to cost, safety issues have a major bearing on the perception of your company to the public. What this did initially with Bumble Bee Tuna, I can only tell you that if you Googled Bumblebee, if you Googled Bumblebee death and you looked at your Google search, it was all over everything. I think they've recovered a little bit, but at the time, it's very difficult to put a monetary of the name of your company on the front page of your local paper. So, again, how is that going to look? $6 million, could we really do it? And your coaching, your mentoring, your doing the right thing can make a huge difference in protecting your company from this kind of a loss. So at the end of the day, safety is a value, has to be internally driven. It's not a priority, it's a value with no compromise. I'm not sending my man in there. We don't have a lockout tagout program. I am not going to compromise my values. Yes, it's going to slow down production, but no one's going to do that job until the safety is in place. And I'll tell you, I was a corporate safety manager for about 6 years. I was called more than once into our president's office by having him say, Kathy, are you really telling us we can't do this particular process right now? Are you really telling us this? Yes, I'm saying this, we're not ready. We're not ready. You didn't give us enough time. We don't have the processes in place. I'm sorry, but someone's life is at stake. So you know what? You can never, ever compromise your own personal values. So a true safety culture is led by men and women committed to the principle of safety, not for compliance. It doesn't matter if there's a regulation for it or not. If somebody could get hurt and they're under your watch, stop it. Do it for the right thing. To this day, I sometimes still have clients will say, show me where it says in the book, Kathy, that I have to do it this way. You know what? you should make sure that you do it because somebody could get hurt. Someone's not going to be able to put food on the table for their families. That's our job as the protector, as the coach and the mentor in the workplace. So I hope that kind of helped set that tone a little bit, that not only do we have an obligation to our company, we have an obligation to ourselves, because in the worst case scenario, if we willfully violate rules and regulations that we know exist, what would a reasonable person do? We could be held personally liable. So I'm pausing.
Yes, thank you,
Great.
Kathy. I was about to jump in.
Thank you.
So we have a guest who works in the beer industry, and
Okay.
OSHA obviously makes its rounds.
Mm-hmm.
And so the Food Safety Modernization Act now allows the FDA to audit breweries as well. At
Yep.
what point does this dual-wielding federal oversight become overkill or too much, would you say?
You know what? That's a really good question, and I'm going to answer it the best way I can. Because we do work with a lot of ag companies as well, and I am noticing, food safety. Food safety has become more and more in the forefront for a lot of reasons. Certainly one is a lot of just the general safety, but also from a homeland security perspective, because we are worried about the integration of bad things in our food supply. Certainly food safety has become much more prevalent. Food safety is different than OSHA. They're looking at the safety of the process, not the safety of the workers. What I am finding, though, is a lot of people that are given this employee safety responsibility also have the food safety responsibility. Those are two totally separate things, and I'll tell you, it's very difficult for somebody to be good at both those things because they're both extremely complicated. Breweries are popping up everywhere. The biggest thing with breweries is certainly the chemical exposures and the confined spaces, because you're getting into these silos and cleaning them out. So is it oversight, overkill? I may not be the best person to ask. I also am very involved in the Homeland Security arena, and so I do a lot of Homeland Security consulting, and I think that it's wise for us to have good food safety processes and procedures. Just know that food safety emphasis is very different than occupational safety emphasis. I hope I answered that right.
Yeah, I think you gave a very good answer. And our other question is it legal to offer incentives like gifts, money, etc. to employees for keeping an injury-free workplace, or perhaps, as you said, demonstrating safe behavior?
Excellent question. So is it legal to reward employees for not having injuries? Absolutely. Traditional incentive programs have been, look, for every month you are injury-free, we're going to put another $25 in your paycheck. For every quarter your team is injury-free, we're going to give everybody a t-shirt or a day off. That has been going on for a long time. Yes, it is legal as long as you are not incentivizing non-reporting. Now, Cal OSHA is getting very testy about incentive programs that are incentivizing or celebrating zero injuries, because they are finding that there's a hidden message sometimes that employers are trying to incentivize non-reporting of legitimate injuries. So my encouragement will be have an incentive program, but do it based on observation of safe behaviors, do it on participation in safety meetings, do it based on your goal for participation in identifying unsafe conditions. Don't have it focused around zero injuries. Sometimes somebody might get hurt. Right? What if I was in a company car and I was, at a red light, I had my brake lights on, I even had my hazard lights on, and someone plowed into the back of me? There are injuries that occur that have absolutely nothing to do with that employee's violating or violating safety rules. But my cautionary tale is do it based on behaviors, not zero injuries, and you're totally fine.
Great. Thanks, Kathy. Free to move on.
Yep, thank you. Thank you for that. So we talk about safety leadership. What does leadership look like? So if we were in person, I would be kind of, asking questions. What's the difference between managing and leading? And again, I don't look at managers as a bad word. Managing is not a bad word. I think if we only manage or we only lead, that's not good, because managing and leading really tie together. So think about the responsibilities, qualities, characteristics, and traits of roles of a leader. Think of someone that you've admired, a teacher, a former manager, a current manager. What are the traits and the qualities that you appreciate in them that helps you be a better person? We'll talk about that in a second. But the same thing is the difference between managing and leading. We kind of talked about managing a little bit. It's the tactical side. It's production schedules. It's hiring. It's staffing. It's making sure that the widget is made. Leading is inspiring people to do the schedule, inspiring them to show up for work, inspiring them to make that widget. So they do go hand in hand. So when we look at this little thing, managers focus on things, leaders focus on people. Okay, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because managers do things that are right, plan, organize, direct, control, follow the rules. Leaders inspire, influence, motivate, build. Now, there's some experts that say, look, we can't motivate other people. Motivation comes from within. Fine, we can inspire, we can influence when we put our leadership hat on at the same time we are managing. Because look, when you're directing or controlling a process, you are inspiring people at the same time to do that process. All you have to do is kind of think, how can I throw safety into this? Hey, you know what? This is really important for you to do it right, because we want you to go home in the same condition that you came to work in. And so I'm going to talk about this a little bit more, but that's the difference between managing and leading. Now, when we look at leadership ingredients, this is a great chart that about 54,000 employees about 10 years ago were interviewed by UC Berkeley students, and they came up in this process that, isn't this fascinating? The leadership ingredient that meant the most to 54,000 employees was integrity. Integrity. It wasn't decision making. It wasn't being the expert. They don't care if their leader was, courageous, which was the last. It's like, don't take a risk with me. But it was integrity. Integrity meaning, look, I truly want you to be safe. I truly am going to tell you the truth. And I'll tell you that when I was a safety manager, we had some pretty nasty processes, not compared to some other industries, but we had, lasers and toxic gases, and it never, it always made me humble to think that when I told somebody it was safe to go into one of these labs, they believed me. They believed me because they knew I would always tell them the truth. I always tried to let, you know what, this could go wrong. If this went wrong, this is what would happen, but these are all the things we've done to make sure that it is safe for you. So having integrity, being a good communicator, people visionary, all of that fell under having high integrity. You don't have to be the expert. If safety is something that you just kind of think, I have no idea what I'm doing, I'm a supervisor, I'm responsible for safety, it doesn't matter that you're not an expert in safety. If they truly believe that you want them to be able to put food on the table for their families at all costs, they will follow you anywhere, and they will work with you. They will have those safe behaviors, and your incentivizing will just come natural, because they'll all be working together, because they will know you have their best interest at heart. So when we look at integrity, what does it look like to you? Well, here's some thoughts. It's trust. They trust that you will keep their safety in mind at all times. That's safety leadership. It's not being an expert in OSHA. It's keeping their safety in mind at all times. It's knowing the names of their families. It's knowing the names of their children. It's knowing what's going on in their life. It's trust. Now, I have a little thing that I'd like to share with you. I went to a presentation, and there was a wonderful speaker. His name is Dave Mitchell, and there were 600 of us in the room. And he asked all 600 of us to write down the 4 people. I want you to kind of hold up your hand and put your thumb in your palm and just hold up 4 fingers. 4 people in our lives that would be affected if we got hurt on the job. Who are the 4 people? My mom, my dad, my spouse, my kids, 4 people. And of course, none of us wrote down our own name. It was those 4. And he said to us, what would your safety program look like in your company if instead of me yelling across the production floor, hey, Ryan, put your safety glasses on? What if instead I said, hey, Ryan, and just held up 4 fingers, and Ryan knew immediately that I was calling him out, if you will, because I cared about his 4. It was not about Ryan at that moment. It was about Ryan's 4. Ryan, how would you feel about that?
That makes a world of difference. I think that really makes me think about others as opposed to just trying to get the job done or only looking out for myself.
Perfect. Exactly, right? So it's like, look, I've been doing this for 30 years. There's nothing you can tell me that's not new. It's like, okay, well, it's not about you. It's about your kids, your grandkids. You won't be able to see them growing up. They will be affected if you get hurt. So maybe we challenge each other and say, look, you know what? Part of our behavior-based safety program is let's have all of our employees at our next staff meeting write down their 4. And we're reminding each other, hey, safety glasses, doing something safely because it's about your 4. Great. Integrity is an understanding and empathy, knowing they've had a bad day, knowing they have major deadlines, right? We all have major deadlines. I used to have a boss when I had one of my first jobs, and the phones were ringing. It was a customer service line, and he'd walk through the department, and we all knew that, of course, this was a joke because he was an excellent manager, and he'd say, hey, work, everybody work. You didn't leave the house this morning saying, bye, honey, I'm going to fun today. You said, bye, honey, I'm going to work today. And when he would say that to us, we knew that he knew that we were under a lot of pressure, and we kind of needed to laugh a little bit. So all of that is that integrity is trust, understanding, empathy, and knowing what makes them tick, seeing them as a human being, which I know you do, but all of that inspires them to be their own safety leader. It will inspire them to feel cared for, which will inspire them to hold up their 4 fingers to another employee and kind of be that safety advocate. So maybe try that with their 4. So one of the things that I wanted to kind of cover again, just kind of looking at this, is really making safety a routine part of every decision you make. Every element of safety is part of the safety culture. It's recognizing safe behavior. So part of that is, again, that safety behavior piece. A couple things when we think about lessons from safety leaders is, one thing is, showing that you care usually spurs them on to better performance. If you ever want to Google the Hawthorne effect, one of the things is, this is a study done in the 20s, and it was just kind of in motivating employees, letting them know that you cared about them. It had nothing to do with safety, but as this researcher talked to these certain number of employees, asked them about their job, made changes, their production went up. There's kind of a fallacy that says that, safety is going to slow down production. Well, this 1920s research showed that when employees felt safer, when they felt taken care of, when they felt heard, their production actually increased. Lesson 2 is, hey, live the values privately and publicly. It's about being visible and viable. I always know when I walk through a plant if that safety manager or that safety leader has been out on the plant. If employees scatter like roaches, I know their style, and I also know they don't know anything about the company. But if they know people's names, if they know what's going on, if people say hello, if there's an acknowledgement, that's a great safety leader. Network among other professionals. Doesn't have to be in safety. Certainly American Society of Safety Engineers is a great organization, but if you're in the roofing industry, hang out with other roofers, go to association meetings, engage with people and best practices in your industry. And another thing that you can do with your employees is, hey, have them commit to 3 things that they'll do to remain safe on the job. Maybe at your next staff meeting, you're going to have them list their 4, talk about the 4, but also say, hey, look, write down 3 things you're going to do to remain safe on the job. I'll get a good night's sleep. I will make sure that I wear good shoes. I'll make sure that I have my eye protection with me at all times. Whatever that is, have them write it down. I want to briefly just talk about unsafe condition, unsafe behavior. One of the things as a safety leader is you're walking through your facility, you're looking at 2 things. An unsafe condition is something that's likely to cause property damage or injury. Fluid on the floor, boxes an aisle away, open file drawers, overloaded circuit electrical plugs. But how did they get there? Because of someone's unsafe behavior. Remember, as a safety coach, if you concentrate on behaviors, the unsafe conditions will take care of themselves. Unsafe behavior, if I spill a liquid and not clean it up, what does it do? It causes fluid on the floor, and so on. So concentrate on those safe behaviors, celebrate safe behaviors, and your safety program will improve. This is just one slide from a colleague of mine. Let me share it about her company. They looked at over 1,900 injuries, because the books say between 80 and 85% of unsafe behaviors cause accidents, and they came up with 78%, pretty close. So just wanted to let you know. Ryan, any questions at this point?
Not at this point.
Right.
Go on ahead.
All right, I know I'm down to my last 10 minutes, so that's terrific. So this is a photograph, if you're looking at my slides, of something that I took walking down the street. I find it fascinating that it's right above a Pilates sign, because that's actually what he looks like he's doing. So when we think about what causes accidents, what causes incidents, and I think this is a perfect perfect picture. You know, we're looking at a gentleman who's using a scaffold that is not correct. It actually looks like it's about ready to be taken down, and it looks like, hey, got to fix that A in the word plaza. He just climbed up the cross braces, put his foot on that side window and said, look, it will take more time for me to fix this scaffold than it is to fix the word plaza. And so what he did was he was rushed. He thought he could just do it real quickly, and then if somebody walked by and knocked the scaffold, he would fall at least 12 to 15 feet. So he is taking risks. I want you to think every time you do an accident investigation, why did the employee do what they did? What was their behavior, their rationality? Why did they think that it was okay to do this? That will help you determine that true or cost of the accident. So real quickly, remember I talked about the 3 buckets: moral, legal, financial. Here's the financial bucket. We talked about the moral, it's the right thing to do. We talked about the legal, you have OSHA, Corporate Criminal Liability Act, and now we certainly have the financial impact. Now, as supervisors, as leaders, you need to understand that certainly the impact of accidents affect our profits, it affects insurance. So just basically, when we think of accidents, the tangible is that bill. Let's just say we have a $1,500 bill because there's a laceration somebody had. Well, 90% of the costs of an accident are really that 90% underneath the water of an iceberg. We only really see 10%. So there's a truer cost. It's not $1,500. It's really 3 to 4 times that because of the indirect cost. Your time taking the accident investigation, all the things that go into managing that claim, and the length of time it stays on your experience mod. And this is a conceptual idea. So I just want to walk this through you real briefly just because of the time, but from a financial perspective, to come up with a truer cost, I'm going to use a sliding ratio. Just as an example, this was set up by Liberty Mutual as a sliding ratio to come up with a truer cost. So we take the direct cost times the multiplier, gives us an indirect cost. Direct plus indirect equals the truer cost. That's about all the math I do. So let's just kind of give an example. Example was $1,500 times 4.5, which is the cost multiplier, gives us an indirect cost of $67.50. We add the direct, the indirect together. The truer cost of my laceration is really $8,250. Okay, just kind of giving us an idea of the truer cost because of how long it's going to pay or stay on our insurance. Here's one thing to think about. Think about the profit margin. How much revenue is going to have to be brought in to pay for that injury? Now, granted, this is under workers' compensation, and certainly if you're self-insured, this makes a lot more sense, but under just a $8,200 injury, so at a 3% profit margin, it's going to take $275,000 in revenue to pay for that one $1,500 injury. And at a 1% profit margin, we're looking at $825,000 to pay for that one injury. That's a lot of revenue. That's a lot of widgets. That's a lot of celery. That's a lot of bakery. That's a lot of stuff to pay for one injury when you look at the revenue required. Now, that other ish number, that other 90% under that iceberg, is your experience mod. Now, I don't have time to go into a lot of detail, but just to let you know that your injuries are calculated by the Workers' Comp Rating Bureau. It's based on payroll rate, your workers' compensation rate, and your experience mod. Your experience mod is either going to modify your rate up or down based on your losses or projected future losses based on your industry. Here's that other 90%. When your insurance renewed in 2016, injuries that occurred in 2012, 13, and 14 were part of that experience mod calculation. So if you had a bad year in 2012, you're still paying for it in 2016. That's why it's not just $1,500. That's why we kind of ish it up a little bit and say, hey, the truer cost was $8,250. So that kind of gives you an idea about our financial obligation as a supervisor to make sure that we control losses, morally because it's the right thing to do. We control losses because we could have fines and penalties under OSHA, and we do it because financially as a leader in your organization, it can affect the bottom line and the profitability. All different kinds of insurance, again, traditional first dollar insured, self-insured, large companies. There's captives, there are insurance pools. You all know what kind of insurance you have, or if you don't know, certainly talk to your boss or your manager or the risk manager of your company. So, Ryan, I'm just going to wrap it up in these last few minutes. I love this quote. This is John Wayne. Sometimes being a manager and showing up for work is courage is being scared to death, but hey, we saddle up anyway and we just go ahead and do it. So here is your role. It is huge, and I look at every single one of you, whether you have safety in your title or not. You are a visionary. You know where the company wants to go. You know what needs to be done. People look up to you. They want you to be positive, optimistic. No one's going to follow an Eeyore, right? So we have to be visionary. You are a role model. If you're not wearing your safety glasses, they won't either. And they may have just had a baby at home and they won't be able to see that baby grow up. You are a role model. Please dress up, wear the safety gear, follow your own rules. You are a manager. You have schedules and things that have to get done. It's not separate of being a safety leader. It's all part of being a safety leader. You are a mentor. How many of you are in the position you're in right now because someone believed in you? I know I am. I would never be in this position, but someone saw something in 25, 30 years ago and mentored me and coached me. So you are someone's mentor. Think of succession planning. Who's going to take your place? And lastly, you are a protector. You are protecting your employees. Never in a safety situation should we be political because people's lives depend on it. As I said, there are many times I put my foot down by saying, you hired me as the safety manager, and I'm telling you, if we do this process right now today, we are not prepared and someone could get hurt. So do the right things. What are the next steps? Maybe do a job hazard analysis for key jobs. Review your employee training records. Do they know the hazards of their job? Can they recognize hazardous or unsafe conditions? If not, do training. Celebrate safe behaviors. Forget the zero injuries, right? Look at celebrating safe behaviors. Do inspections. Involve your employees. Do a safety survey. How are we doing? Provide feedback and make improvements. And just like we said at the beginning, you are saving lives, you are preventing injuries and illnesses, and you are protecting your company from financial harm. And Ryan, that's all I have today.
Thank you so much, Kathy. We do have one short, quick question from one of our audience members.
Okay.
Our job hazards analysis, our job hazard analyses mandatory by OSHA?
Very good question. So here's the thing. No, but here's what OSHA requires. OSHA requires that employers assess hazards of their job. For those of you in California, it's under Section 4, which is where we put the codes of safe work practices. A job hazard analysis shows OSHA that you know that we have 5, 6, 7 tasks in our company that we have said are maybe the most hazardous, that we have really assessed to determine that do we have the right personal protective equipment, do we need lockout, tagout, have we put the right controls in place. There is nothing in any OSHA regulation that says you have to do job hazard analysis, but I can tell you that it does show OSHA that you employer, you supervisor, have analyzed the workplace, understand the hazards, have trained your employees what the hazards are, how to recognize the hazards, and how to protect them. So we do recommend that, look, eventually you do all jobs in your workplace, but at least maybe go by department and say, look, in this department there might be 2 or 3 jobs that are the most hazardous. Let's do the JHA, which is taking the steps, identifying the hazard of the steps, and putting in the control of the hazard of that step.
Great. Well, with that, I don't see any other audience questions unless anyone wants to jump in these last few moments as I end our presentation. And with that, thank you so much, Kathy. That was a fantastic presentation. I think we all learned a great deal.
Thank you, Ryan. I really appreciate it. It was an honor. If anyone has any questions, don't hesitate to get in touch with us. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day. Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you. Goodbye, everyone.